All right, Christian, thank you for that. We'll catch up with you again in just a little bit. Right now, we're going to welcome our air cargo editor, Eric Kulisch, with us. He's also a writer for American Shipper. Eric, thanks for being here. And we're going to stick on that theme of the hot weather out across the West Coast and the impacts that it's having right now on how ships are sourcing their power. So thanks for being here this morning. What can you tell us about what's going on?
Yeah, good morning, Kaylee. Definitely, impacts on the freight transportation system from climate change and these heat waves, and more specifically to California, the governor there proclaimed a state of emergency because of the heat waves over the last several days. And interestingly, if you read the fine print, it applies to the major container ports in California. So basically what he's asked, and it seems to be voluntary, is ask the ports or the vessel operators to not plug into shore power. I think the rules right now are that 80% of a fleet's vessel calls over the course of a year need to plug into shore power instead of running their diesel or auxiliary engines to reduce emissions, to reduce particulate matter and other gases that affect the neighboring cities. So that's been the rule. But because there's so much strain on the electric grid right now, they want brownouts. They want available electricity for people to run their air conditioning. So one of the asks is don't plug in, don't use the electric power if you can. You have dispensation for several days, I think through this coming Saturday, to use your onboard engines and not plug into electric.
So, Eric, it's interesting because it sounds like there's two opposite sides here. One is asking them not to, and the other was a mandate that they had to. Is this a positive or a negative for those ships? Because it sounds like saying 80% have to plug in before was the rule to eliminate that. And now saying, hey, right, please don't. It sounds like they'd be saying, okay, cool, because we really didn't want to anyways. You're forcing us to. Is this, I mean, seriously, is this a negative? Does this impact those shipping lines, the vessels, in a negative manner?
I asked the Pacific Maritime Shipping Association that represents the terminal operators and the vessel carriers, and they said, most of them, they expect their members to try and comply as good corporate citizens. And I think it depends. Most of these vessels, not all the vessels have been retrofitted over the years or built with electric, plug-in infrastructure. So I can't remember exactly what the rules are, but it depends on the size of ship and if it's a new build and so forth. But within the ships that are, have to comply, I think compliance is relatively high. If you look at some of the stats, it looks like the compliance is below 80% in the last year or the first half of this year. But a lot of that has to do with, because of the supply chain disruptions, there's been a lot of ad hoc ships and people throwing in small, 500 TEU container ships and grabbing any, intra-Asia freighter they can and putting it on the Trans-Pacific routes. And those don't necessarily qualify or meet the requirements. So generally speaking, I don't think the vessel operators will mind running their auxiliary engines, which, use low sulfur distillates or other types of, cleaner marine fuels.
So, Eric, the interesting thing about this, as we mentioned, is this isn't necessarily like a climate change-focused initiative. This is the fact that the demand for electricity in California is just forecast to be so high throughout really the next week that they're looking to alleviate some of that demand that would be taken up by these ships. Do you have a grasp on how much actual power demand that will change or save, or kind of how it relates, I guess, into if they were getting clean energy, cleanish energy? Of course, we know that they're in California, so the majority of their energy would be clean, coming in from the electric side of things versus now they're burning that ultra-low sulfur distillate, as you mentioned, which is obviously not a clean burning fuel.
Right. I don't have those numbers, but, a ship is like some of these large container ships, it's like a small neighborhood or small city. So there's a, pretty fair amount of draw on the power system or on the load. So, I would suspect it would make some, fair amount of difference of a lot of these container ships didn't plug in. Any amount helps. I think it is ironic in a sense that the rules are put in place for environmental reasons, right? We don't want to burn a bunker fuel, and even more, we don't want to burn even cleaner fuels. Particularly for the particulate matter, but also for the greenhouse gases. But now, because climate change has gotten so bad and impacted the electrical system, we have to go in reverse and tell them, don't plug into the clean electrical system to kind of save the system temporarily. So, that is kind of interesting. I think California's electric power is from cleaner or renewable sources is having a little bit of trouble right now because of the drought. There's a little less access to hydropower. So, that's another, you kind of have an impact on the demand. You have demand higher for air conditioning, and then you've got supply issues because the rivers are low, so they can't draw as much from hydropower.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and like you said, I was pointing out the irony of this to Dooner last week when it first came out. California was saying don't plug in your EVs and set your thermostats on 78 and that type of stuff, and I was kind of laughing about it and saying how ridiculous it was. Dooner pointed out that this is actually could be a very positive thing because it really points out what we've all been talking about before is the infrastructure and the investment that needs to go into this. The people that you're talking about this particular thing, does this fan the flames of saying, hey, we got to do something? This is absolutely ridiculous, or what is the sentiment there?
Yeah, I think it raises some interesting questions because obviously you need more infrastructure to have access to the power, but you also need more supply. And then what if you have a heat wave and everybody's plugged in? Imagine everybody plugged into electric vehicles and electric shore power, and now the grid gets overwhelmed. I don't know what happens, so does that mean we need more nuclear power or other things that, because when the supply or demand, overwhelms the system, I don't know I haven't thought that through, but the implications could be pretty serious.
Yeah.
All you have to do is ask Texas about it.
I was just going to say, or deep freeze in Texas does it. Eric, I think you need to come forward with that cold fusion technology you've been sitting on for the last couple of years. I think that might help us. So what else you got working on there, Eric? What else is moving on there? I know we noticed we were looking at the fact that we're down to, I think, 8 vessels in the backlog in San Pedro, but 41 out in Savannah, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, the switch is, the tilt is definitely to the East Coast for various reasons, including concerns about the ILWU potential labor action on the West Coast. But, I just wanted to briefly bring up, since we're talking about climate change, that these heat waves and the climate change isn't necessarily limited to what's happening in California. You see massive heat waves in China where they've had to cut power outage to the use by the factories, which has cut production and shipping by the airlines. The huge drought in Europe, which has dried up the Rhine River and some other rivers, so cargo traffic is slow to a trickle, or they're light loading the barges at 20% so they can get through the much lower river levels. So it's just you see this all over the world now.
Right, and it's only going to get worse. So, Eric, thank you for joining us this morning. Of course, we'll catch up with you on American Shipper as well as on freightwaves.com, and we'll talk to you soon.
Great seeing you guys. Thanks.